the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in your sight, O Lord. Jesus in our gospel this morning tells the parable of two sons. If you extract the parable and just read it, it seems quite simple. The moral of it is, if you make promises, you should keep your promise. One young man said, I will go into the vineyard. And then he changed his mind and he said to himself, no, I'm not going to do that. Promises are important to us. You come up to the altar to be married and you make a promise to the other. It's not something that's taken frivolously. It should be something that's going to be held on to forever. And we were taught this by our mothers when we were 5 years old. We were taught it in kindergarten. And it's something that we need to remember. And when somebody doesn't keep a promise, it really hurts. If mother teaches you this and then later on makes a promise to you and doesn't keep it, you never forget that. Your whole life will be something that remembers that. She didn't live up to what she said. The point is, though, you see, why would we have this as a gospel reading? I mean, you don't need to come to church to hear this. You've learned this elsewhere. You can take a simple book on ethics and you're going to see the same thing. And so we have to look at this a little bit more closely. We have to not simply extract this little parable, but we have to see the context in which it lays. The gospel begins as Jesus goes back into Jerusalem. He has already entered Jerusalem on Palm Sunday. This is the last week of his life, and he tells one parable after another. Robert Farrar Capon, who has some wonderful things to say about the parables, tells us that these are the parables of judgment. While he is teaching, the chief priests and the elders of the temple come up to him and they say, by what authority do you do what you're doing? And who gave you this authority? Now, if you remember to the beginning of the gospel, when Jesus first went into the synagogue at Capernaum, the people were astonished at his authority because he didn't speak like the rabbis. The rabbis would tell the congregation what others in the past have said about a particular passage. Jesus didn't do that. Jesus spoke as if he knew. Jesus spoke as if he had generated this law right from his own being. He acted differently, and they were astounded. And towards the end of that session together, that hour or however long it lasted, there was a man who came into the synagogue with an unclean spirit. And he exorcised this unclean spirit from him. And again, the same word is used. People were astounded at his authority, even over spirits. What is this? A new kind of teaching, you're saying? This authority that he speaks? So here we have, you see, the same word at the beginning of the gospel and now towards the very end of the gospel. They're asking from where he gets his authority. Now, Jesus never argues with anyone. He never tries to persuade them with arguments, with point A, point B, point C, point D. He doesn't do that. He simply stands there in all of his authority. Later on we could say he hangs on the cross in his authority. And we have to make a choice. Do we listen to him or do we not? Do we believe him or do we not? Anyway, so he comes back to the chief priests, and he pulls a trick that other rabbis have pulled. He says, all right, I'll answer your question if you answer my question. You know, rabbis are fond of answering a question with a question. There were a group of students who sat under the tutelage of this one rabbi, and he constantly did this technique. They'd ask a question and he would answer it by asking another question. And finally, one of the young men said, Rabbi, why do you always answer a question with another question? And there was a long pause. And the student figured, all right, now I'm going to get a straight answer. And then the rabbi opened his mouth and he said, well, why shouldn't I answer a question with a question? And, you know, what else do you say? He was just totally flabbergasted. But that's what Jesus does here. He says, all right, I'll answer your question if you answer mine. Where did the baptism of John come from? Did it come from heaven? Or did it come from human origin? Well, so they gather in a little huddle somewhere and they have to talk this thing over. It's not a hard answer, but they want to come up with the right answer. And so they say, you know, amongst themselves, if we say his baptism came from heaven, Jesus is going to say, well, why didn't you believe John? And if we say it was of human origin, the people are going to uprise against us because they truly believed that John's baptism was from heaven. And so they came back with the easy way out. We don't know. And so Jesus says, well, since you didn't answer my question, I'm not going to answer your question. And then he launches into this parable of the two sons. He goes to the first son and he says, son, I want you to go and work the vineyard today. Vineyard in the Old Testament was synonymous with Israel. Israel was God's vineyard. Any Jew would know that. And as he told the story, they'd have that in mind. Son, I want you to go and work the vineyard today. And he says, I will not go. But then he thinks about it and he changes his mind. Why? Because, you see, he's looking at his father now as someone with authority. His father isn't going to ask him to do something frivolously. There must be a good reason that he wants his son to go and work in the vineyard. And so, having thought that over, he bows to the father's authority and he changes his mind and he goes to the vineyard. He trusts that his father has a good reason for him to go to the vineyard. He has faith in his father. The parable continues, and the father goes to the second son. He says, "Son, go and work the vineyard today." The second son says, "I'll do it. Don't worry." Then the father leaves and he thinks about it. He says, "Why should I go and work the vineyard today? There's nothing special going on at the vineyard. Everybody has their job. Everybody knows what they're supposed to do. I don't need to go there today." And so he disregards, you see, the authority of the father. He takes his own authority. He's thinking that he knows better than what the father does. And so he decides, well, I'm going to do my own thing today. I really don't need to go to the vineyard. And so there is no trust in the father. He doesn't have faith in the father's wishes. He doesn't have faith in what the father is requesting of him. Who did the will of the Father, Jesus said? Well, it's very simple, isn't it? Even the chief priests come up with the answer. Sure, it's the one who went and worked in the vineyard. And then Jesus finishes this up with a wallop. He says, well, you know, the tax collectors and the prostitutes listened to John the Baptist, and they turned to God. But you heard John also, and you turned away. You were not interested. They began to have faith. You did not. And, you know, as he's talking about John, he's also talking about himself, as he is the successor now to John. You're not listening to me. You're asking by what authority I do this. Well, you're going to have to figure that out. I'm not going to spell it out for you. I'm not going to argue with you. I'm just going to stand here in all of my authority. And you're either going to have faith, or you're going to thumb your nose at me, thinking that you know better. You see, this little parable is not about making promises and keeping promises. That's only if you take it out and look at it by itself. But in the context, it's so much deeper. It has to do with faith and unfaith. Jesus stands there. Jesus hangs on the cross. It seems strange, unbelievable. And yet there he is. Do we trust him? Do we believe him? Because if we go on our own way, you see, if we think we know better, and we finally at the end come to God with what we know, God's not going to be interested. Because he's closed his books. He's no longer looking at what we do or what we don't do. It all comes from sin, you see. And he's closed his books on that. He says, all I'm interested in is forgiving you. But if you don't forget, if you don't believe that, then there's nothing more I can do. Those who believe it, who have faith, come and enjoy the presence of the Father. And those who do not are outside. They judge themselves. They judge that, we're not interested in that. And so they're outside of the relationship with the Father. This little parable has a lot to it if we read it in the context of the rest of the gospel. Same question is raised to us. I'm here. Do you trust me? Amen. The peace of God, which passes all understanding, keep your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Our next hymn is 772.